I love horror. It's easily one of my favorite genres for media. A lot of my favorite movies are horror movies, and a lot of the films I'll go to theaters to watch are horror. Majority of the games I play on stream are horror, and most of the videos I've made for this channel are horror related. Last year I posted a video about some of the most disturbing anime I've ever watched, and the topic has always been dicey. Can anime really scare people? Regardless, most of the comments felt that there were shows I had forgotten or overlooked for the video. And that's cause, shockingly, I hadn't seen them yet. So today, for the wonderful month of Halloween, I have decided to watch 13 horror anime. And by the end of this video, we will see if there are any shows that match the level of uncomfort that the anime I talked about last year gave me. I will preface that I'm going to be a lot harder on the shows I talk about compared to movies, as they have a lot more time to develop their stories and characters. Without further ado, the first anime I watched for Halloween was Shiki. Shiki is a show I had tried to watch one other time before, but decided to drop it around episode 3 or 4. When I started making the list for this video, I decided Shiki would be on it so I could pick it back up. Wow, do I regret having not watched Shiki sooner. Life in the small town of Sotoba is bliss and simple. Everybody knows everyone, with practically everyone having grown up together. Even though it's quite isolated from society, residents are still moving in as the town recently welcomed the Natsuno family, and is now welcoming a family to the newly built Kanamasa mansion. With a town as tight-knit as this one, it becomes incredibly alarming when one of the villagers, Megami Shizumu, suddenly disappears. The village finds her hours later, but she has fallen ill with an unknown disease, passing away a few days later. Even if they are heartbroken by this sudden passing of youth, the village has no time to grieve as the death toll begins to ramp up over the course of the summer. The town's doctor, Toshio Ozaki, suspects something more than a disease is happening to this village, while Natsuno Yuki believes someone to be stalking him every night. Natsuno joins forces with two of Megami's friends, Kaori and Akira Tanaka, to find out what the roots of all the deaths is and whether it could relate to the new residents at the Kanamasa mansion. Shiki takes a few episodes to get going, but once you do, the tension in it never stops. Death is falling upon this village, and in a lot of Japanese cultures, or rather really any culture for that matter, but especially in Japan, they are quick to blame the outsiders. Sotoba's residents don't want to blame the new family to the village, and in fact, Ozaki believes it could be an epidemic of some kind, as everyone seems to develop similar symptoms. But it's very quickly apparent that there is something amiss with the Kirishiki family. Those are the people that live in the Kanamase mansion, and the doctor's theory of an epidemic is thrown out when he discovers bite marks in the victims. That's right, folks. Shiki is a story about a vampire invasion. Unlike Hellsing, which we'll talk about later in this video, where it weaponizes vampires and uses them in war, Shiki shows how horrific vampires can truly be in a small town setting. They creep in seemingly looking like normal people, and with just a simple, kind invitation to come inside, one that is ever so common in the friendly small town of Sotoba, you have doomed your entire family to suffer. Even while we know as an omnipotent observer, this entire village has no idea what is happening to them. So many emotions are so palpable inside this story. Fear for your family and yourself falling ill and succumbing to an unknown illness that's plaguing your village. Watching friend after friend after friend die or move away because they don't want to be next. Not knowing who to trust or what to think, but still wanting to uphold your love for that small town you've grown up in, possibly for generations of your family. But no matter what you do, you will likely die or live long enough to watch the town you love so fall to ruin. Even as viewers watch this village fall, rooting for the humans to figure everything out and overtake the vampires, you may find yourself time and time again questioning who the real monsters are in this situation. Shiki will have you wondering whether just because they're vampires, does that mean they lose their humanity? Characters are also incredibly interesting in the series, as though they may come off as one note at times, these origin beats for these characters bounce off into directions an audience may never expect. Ozaki, the doctor of the village, is determined to save his people from this unknown illness, and he doesn't care what he has to do to save them. Natsuno, a member of a family who moved in before the Kirishikis, holds resentment for this town and wants to be free, but finds something that binds him to Sotoba, making him want to fight for it. Megami, the girl who goes missing and dies, wants so badly to leave this village and hates everyone in it that this desire and hatred leads her to do so many heinous things to it. Seishin Moroi, a local priest in the town, comes to find out what is happening and is torn between life and death and right and wrong. There are so many more characters in the cast which at first impression could make the show seem bloated, but shockingly everyone in the cast is given some amount of time to make them memorable and have the audience care for them. There is not one bad character in this series. There are definitely characters you won't like, but that doesn't mean they are poorly written. Along with the fantastic story and great characters, for coming out in 2010, Shiki also looks stunning, being better animated than some titles that come out 10 years after it did. The soundtrack that plays through each episode is hauntingly depressing. Everything culminates together to bring an experience to the viewer that they will surely not forget. It feels very reminiscent of one of my favorite movies, the South Korean film called The Wailing. One of the last times I'd been this genuinely excited to watch an anime was when I first watched Devilman Crybaby almost a year ago. Watching the mystery and the story of this town unfold was just so thrilling, and the moment it ended, I couldn't fathom that it was actually over. I really wanted more of Shiki. Because of how well produced and fantastically written this series is, I will be giving the overall score a firm 9 out of 10. Next, since this video is about horror anime, for Halloween, naturally I have to rate the shows on how spooky they can be. Shiki is one of the few anime that will actually spook its viewers from time to time. Every character in Shiki, while being given care and writing, also has very unique designs. Oftentimes, I felt as if they were reminiscent of characters from old Saturday morning anime showings like Beyblade, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Bakugan. It's these almost childlike designs that make the carnage and death that takes place in the series all the more jarring, and these designs are used in effective ways to scare an audience. Many frames, moments, or deaths will be very memorable to viewers. However, the longer the show goes on and the more we find out about the vampires, the less scary it gets and the overall series becomes, opting to focus much more on its story. While narratively and for overall enjoyment, this is obviously a great thing. Unfortunately, this can put a damper on the horror. It is still effective, so I will give the spooky a 7 out of 10. While Shiki may have been a show I really liked, this next series was not one I enjoyed so much. High-Rise Invasion was inescapable online a few years ago. No matter where I went, this masked Tumblr sexy man followed me everywhere. Finally, I've gotten around to seeing what the hype was about, and frankly, I don't really know what there was to hype up. Yuri Hanjo finds herself transported to a world of high-rise buildings, where you are stuck on the upper floors and cannot get down. In this world, humans are hunted by the masks, which are, well, people wearing masks with supernatural abilities. Yuri finds out her brother is trapped in this world with her, and she is determined to find him and make it out of this hellish cityscape. The series starts off being a survival horror, with the cast trying to escape these masked people on top of cramped high-rises. Hence the title. You feel nervous for Yuri, as these masked people are often very threatening, until we find out in the very first episode that more times than not, they will not harm anyone, and just try to make them jump off the building. So immediately this bumps down the threat factor, which off the bat diminishes the intrigue of the entire series, as the threat of these masked people are non-existent, and most, if not all of them, get killed by the cast throughout the series anyways. We find out that the only real threat in this world is actual people, and if that wasn't enough to dampen the threats for these characters, turns out there's also a helicopter introduced in episode 1 that can let the cast leave whenever they really feel like it, so long as they're there when the helicopter lands. These aren't the real issues with this series though. High-Rise Invasion has a massive identity crisis, which really starts to creep in like 3 or 4 episodes in. Turns out these masks actually give whoever puts them on superpowers, which our characters later get these superpowers. So if there was any drop of suspense left in the plot, it leaves because our cast becomes invincible, has aim assist, and becomes killing machines. If you remove the suspense from a series driven on suspense, what's the point in watching? This world apparently is a death game, where people who put on a faceless mask have the potential to become God. Not only can they become a god, they can summon and control masked people like chess pieces or heroes from Fate Stay Night, where they then use these people to fight for them to help and aid them to become god candidates. This show started off as I need to escape this world with my brother and go home, and in a matter of episodes became I will become the god of this world with the help of my masked servants and then destroy it. It's super clear that the author just wrote whatever he thought was cool and didn't really consider anything else outside of this. Our main character, Yuri's character, is just as jumbled as the concept for this show. She can't decide whether she wants to escape, wants to kill people, wants to save her brother or other people, or whether she wants to kill literally everyone. I actually want to touch on Yuri's feelings of killing people a little bit. One moment Yuri doesn't want to kill people, then she decides to kill only masked people because they aren't people. Not sure how she convinced herself of that, but yeah, she believes there aren't people for some reason. Not for very long though, because then she finds out that behind those masks are real people being mind controlled and doesn't want to kill them. But then she decides that since they got mind controlled, they aren't people anymore and kills them, but still remains super adamant about not wanting to kill people, even though she is literally always killing people. She changes her mind again a little bit later on and considers some masked people real people. But if she doesn't like them or hold an attachment to them in some form, then they're not real people again. Doesn't this just seem kind of weird and convoluted? Why not, with her desire to avoid killing people, does she try to figure out if there's a way to free these masked people from their mind control or something? Yuri meets Mayuko Nisei, another non-masked human, who at the time is presented as a psychopath who will kill anyone in her way. We are literally introduced to her killing somebody. At this time, this goes completely against Yuri's morals, but despite just killing a non-masked person right in front of her, Yuri thinks, yeah, this girl is normal. No, she just killed somebody right in front of you. She is not normal. Mayuko seems to have the foundations to be an interesting character, but her backstory is literally fed to us in 2 monologues in her head, and that's all we get for her. Instead, we take any further characterizations for her as Yuri bait. Yes, you heard me right. Yuri bait. She constantly blushes at holding hands, seeing Yuri's panties. We'll get to that later. There's a lot for that for some reason. And being up close to Yuri. She gets jealous of other girls who talk to her. It's just very clear she's romantically interested in her, but Yuri seems anything but interested. So we're put in a loop where the show puts them in romantic or intimate moments, more than likely just to bring shippers or Yuri fans in. The only time that Yuri actually shows attraction for any character in the series is to Sniper Mask, who is a man. Given our leads, it's no wonder audiences latch on to Sniper Mask and later Kuon, as they are really the only 2 decent characters. Going back to the panty comment, I'm not sure if it's the animators or the mangaka, but one of them really loves ass. A large portion of the show is meant to draw attention to panties, women's thighs, and straight up ass shots. Sometimes they were easily ignored, other times it was pretty distracting. At all times, it was another layer to alleviate any tension an audience may feel. And they happened once every few minutes, every single episode too. For example, Mayuko has the front of her shirt ripped off to reveal her bra, and even though she could literally button up her jacket or get a new shirt, she just leaves her bra hanging out for the entire rest of the show. As for the production, I'll keep it brief. The animation was lackluster. High-Rise Invasion is a show that looks like it came out 10 years ago, which in itself is an insult to those shows. Again, Shiki looked way better despite coming out in 2010. Although if it had involved showing one of these girls sexually, the animation team was going to go hard and do everything they can to make that shit look good. Nothing else clearly deserved as much attention as Ass did. High-Rise Invasion, despite trying super hard to be a high-stakes death game, was really boring because of how much it just never wanted to commit to something narratively. Go watch Future Diary or Mirai Nikki if you want to watch a show with a near identical concept that's more interesting in literally every single way, or even Darwin's Game is probably better, although I haven't seen it. I'll give it overall a 2 out of 10, probably one of the worst animes I've seen in a minute. And as for the spooky, if you were at all scared by this, in no world are you going to be able to handle any of the shows in this video. It's getting a 1 out of 10. Next up on my watch list was the anime Dark Gathering. When he was younger, Keitsuro Gentuga had a traumatic encounter with a spirit that cursed his right hand, forcing him to wear a glove and also making him a hub for spirits. Our story follows as he begins college, where he's trying his best to live a normal life. His childhood friend, Aiko Hozuki, pushes him to become a tutor so he can get some cash, gotta love money, and some normal human interaction on top of that. However, his first client ends up being Aiko's cousin that she's been housing, named Yayoi, who has 2 pupils in each eye that allows her to see both the real world and the spirit world. Despite being an elementary school student, she is on a journey to hunt spirits and find the one who is holding the soul of her dead mother. Even though he wants to live a normal life, he decides to join Yayoi in her quest to find the soul of her mother in hopes of removing his own curse along the way. Dark Gathering is a show I'm actually really conflicted about. The sound of something that feels human, but isn't. Seeing something that looks human, but isn't. Watching a human body contort and twist in horrific ways that should not be possible. And so many other means of what makes horror effective doesn't really translate well into animation. Especially with anime. Dark Gathering is a show that actually manages to take the essence of what can make animation scary and does an amazing job of making a great horror anime. For example, the sound design is stellar. Here, let me show you what I mean. In case you scare easily, mute the video until this icon on the screen leaves. Okay, now that I'm like re-listening to it for the video, maybe it's a little goofy sounding, but when I first watched it, I thought that sounded pretty cool. Multiple times throughout the show, we hear these wails or cries of people that sound just real and painful enough that it sends chills down my spine. To complement the sound design, the music channels John Carpenter and makes music very reminiscent of tracks in Halloween or Christine. As for visually, what could make this show scary? The body horror is very freaky. There were some sequences that grossed me out so bad I had to look away from the screen. And honestly, that's shocking considering it's an anime. The ghost design is impeccable in Dark Gathering. At first, it starts off very tame, but as it goes on, we get great depictions of like onryos, onis, and other types of ghosts that look really spooky. The supernatural aspects as a whole were done very well. I was very surprised. Did you know that ghosts can bleed too? Cause damn, this series really makes gore explosions as if these ghosts were in like an Evil Dead movie. I do believe this anime has started a path that others could follow if they wanted to be truly scary. Although for my praises, I've got a handful of complaints about the show. There will be times where they will really try to scare the audience and then go right to cracking jokes about shit like how Keitaro is a virgin. There will be times where we will try to dive into very deep topics like suicide or bullying, and then we'll go right to silly slice of life moments like fishing. The atmosphere in Dark Gathering is just so incredibly inconsistent. It doesn't help that despite the ghosts and serious subject matters, this show is a shonen. Yayoi gets into spiritual battles with ghosts and then she catches them like they're damn Pokemon. I understand that some people need some type of comic relief in a series to keep it from being too bleak, which is where the shonen or slice of life moments come into play, but even still, I'm not really sure if Dark Gathering is able to balance those very different moods together well. If you want the jokes to tie into the atmosphere of the film, you need to go along the lines making dark humor like they do in Rosemary's Baby, or go from having it being goofs and gaffs to horrific shit like in Talk to Me. We can't just keep going back and forth with shit like, damn, Keitaro, you suck at talking to people. Get better soon. And then here is this child whose mom made him eat meatballs of real people and then killed him and made him into meatballs. I've got gripes with the characters as well. Keitaro is a really, really boring main character. He has little to no personality outside of trying to be righteous, wanting to talk to people, and being scared all the time. Over the course of the show, he hardly changes or grows, and that's frustrating because he definitely has the potential to, and that's just not met in the first season at least. Yayoi is kind of a deus ex machina. She has a solution to literally every problem and can take every ghost down. Don't get me wrong, she is definitely the most interesting character in this series by a landslide, and she handles things way more maturely than any of the adults in the series do, despite being a child. But her ability to just solve any situation she's placed in, or how she'll infodump about everything that's going on in that situation, is kind of boring. It feels like the show has no faith in the audience to pick up on what's going on. And Aiko is certainly a character. I already know a lot of people out there will like her, but I do not really tend to like this yandere character type, and she is no exception. She is a freak! There are also moments that felt like fetish content. For example, there's this impregnation scene with a ghost impregnating Aiko. Not kidding, that's literally a moment that happens in it. There are other similar beats like this, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Dark Gathering has one of the strongest pilot episodes I've ever seen. Then it follows a Ghost of the Week formula for around 7 episodes, where each episode is pretty much the exact same. Introduce a ghost, it wants to kill Keitaro, and Yayoi saves the day. Each episode introduces little new pieces of info throughout about what the greater plot will be. Around episode 8 is where I felt the show really finally found its footing, and once it did, it definitely was more enjoyable. But the journey there was just such a drag, and I didn't feel Keitaro and Aiko got too much better even after the show finally did get going. The power scaling. Yes, the power scaling in the Ghost show. Amped up way too dramatically. We go from, again, Ghost of the Week to gods and S-tier super strong Giga Demons in a matter of episodes. I should also mention the anime ends as open-ended as a story can, with it being meant to directly lead into a season 2, but no new season has been greenlit as of this video. It feels kind of frustrating to finish the 25 episodes with no payoff and a cliffhanger. Although I found myself bored with the story often, I did ultimately enjoy myself with Dark Gathering. It was not the worst show by all means. When the show hit, it really hit. And when it didn't, it was still serviceable. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Going back to the horror elements, they really were just so consistently good that I'll be giving the spooky an 8 out of 10. Sometimes the horror was some of the best I've seen in anime, and I would definitely recommend it as a good horror anime to anyone that watches it. Just try not to really think about the story too much at all. Before we get into this next segment, I'd like to preface something. More times than not, I do not tolerate fan service. When I was younger, I didn't mind it much, but as I've grown older, I've grown more and more tired of seeing it. I don't mind if the series is raunchy or something of that nature, but a lot of the times it's included in shows where it doesn't really fit. Like Mieruko-Chan. After having just a normal day at school, Miko Yotsuya sees something peculiar in the reflection of her phone screen. It scares her and leads her to drop it, but upon picking up her phone, she is met with a horrific, undead person asking if she can see him. She pretends if this being isn't there, and eventually it leaves. But for whatever reason now, she can see ghosts, and she can see them everywhere. Terrified by her newfound vision, she tries her best to keep her cool at all times so as to not freak her friend Hana Yurikawa out, and learn to live with the horrors she now has to see on a daily basis. The title Mieruko-Chan, you may notice, isn't the name of the main character, and instead is a name that translates to the girl who can see them. I watched every episode of this horror comedy series with my girlfriend Juliet, and shockingly, we had a pretty good time. The ghost designs ramp up each episode, with the next being even more horrifically designed than the last, and you're left wondering if this will finally make Miko crack. As the series progresses, we get a fair amount of the lore for the world, and the spirits that come in a form as digestible. We figure it out as Miko figures it out. There are mediums, gods, spirits who consume others to get much stronger, just like in Dark Gathering, and auras. But there is likely more we don't know about yet, and even though the world is vast and spooky, it's also incredibly heartwarming. There are a myriad of scenes that could potentially bring a tear to the viewer, and I didn't expect that at all from a horror comedy series. A big help for this wholesome tone that carries throughout Mieruko-Chan is the time spent making all of its characters quite human, and establishing their relationships with one another. Watching Hana and Miko interact each episode was quite a treat. They felt like genuine best friends. Later, Yulia is added into the duo to make it a trio, and she doesn't ruin the vibe at all. In fact, she feels as if she strengthens the bond, bringing in something new to their group. Even the secondary cast for this show is really strong, with a reoccurring character named Gozuka, who is a giant sweetheart, and Miko's little brother Kyosuke, who feels like a great sibling. There are only two downsides to the show, one of which is that the gimmick can get a little too formulaic at times. Yes, Miko suddenly seeing ghosts and learning to deal with that reality is funny, and leads to a lot of hilarious moments. There are many times we laughed at the absurd situations that would arise from this, but after watching her go through almost the same scenario for multiple episodes, it begins to really drag. Thankfully, this formula dials down, and the show dives into Miko trying to understand what she would do with the spiritual power of hers, but it takes a little while to get there. And the biggest downside that I'm sure will turn many people away from it is the fan service. The director of Mieruko-Chan is Yuki Ogawa, who is known for having directed episodes in How to Raise a Boring Girlfriend, and My Wife is the Student Council President, as well as directing the entirety of Interspecies Reviewers, Tawawa on Monday, and Miru Tights. Yeah, I'm sure some of you get the issue here, but for those that don't, these shows are all ecchi or fan service heavy series. Some of them, that's the entire point of the show. While the manga does have some fan service elements at the beginning, those angles and moments are ramped up by 200% for the anime. During the first few episodes, it's really hard to even go a few minutes without having an ass shot, a boob shot, a thigh or an upskirt angle, and a shower or locker room scene. It gets incredibly tiring incredibly quickly, and made me and Juliet both want to drop the show at multiple points.
We decided to stick through and continue watching, and we were rewarded for doing so, as for a large part of the season, those moments leave almost entirely. However, of course, they are still present, and they are an active deterrent from the story and can dial down what would normally be a terrifying scene by randomly showing a full frame of a teenager's ass. Mieruko-Chan is a series that absolutely isn't for everyone. It definitely at times almost made me and Juliet quit watching, but if you can manage to stomach the first few episodes, it turns into a surprisingly rich story that has a lot to offer its viewers. I will be giving the story a 7 out of 10 and the spooky a 6 out of 10, which sucks because I would love to rate both higher, but the fan service just really is hard to ignore. I wish it wasn't present in the series, but well, you know, it's both Japan and the horror genre. Sometimes getting ass and titties is just the downside of being a horror fan.
Next up, I watched Another, which is the first of many classic anime on this list. Very popular horror anime I watched for this Halloween season. I have to be completely honest though, I'm confused how this one has stayed so relevant in the public consciousness. Before Koichi Sakakibara is able to make his big debut at his new school, his lung collapses and he lands in the hospital for about a month. While there, he is visited by 3 students who all act very peculiar, and he's later informed by his aunt, who he lives with, that he's required to follow a set of rules at school. Once at school, he finds himself drawn to Mei Misaki, a mysterious girl with an eye patch. Strangely, all of his classmates act as if she doesn't exist, and no one wants to tell Koichi why this is the case. But it's a part of the school's rules. Koichi ignores the rules and acknowledges Mei's existence, where a series of horrible tragedies emerge afterwards, and it's up to Koichi, Mei, and their classmates to find out what's going on and save their lives. Another feels like a show that is a combination of many different series. The setup feels reminiscent of Higurashi, in that the series, a boy named Keiichi Maibara moves to an isolated village, where in it no one will tell him about a curse that allegedly affects that village. Gradually, a bunch of deaths occur as well. The series then seemingly takes inspiration from Final Destination, a series of movies where characters die in extremely extravagant ways once they've been marked by death. While I do like the first and third movie for Final Destination, Another taking inspiration from it is not a good thing. The production value for the series is seemingly high thanks to PA Works, a studio famous for having made Angel Beats, Charlotte, and recently Skip to Loafer. Scenes and backgrounds are very pretty. The animation is high quality. The first few episodes build a good mystery too, making you wonder who is really alive and why people are hiding things from Koichi, and what could transpire when things begin to unravel. But once the plot does begin to unravel, the series takes a nosedive that never stops, because the story is a complete disaster. The main crux of Another is the Calamity, an event where every year the 9th grade class 3 receives an extra member in its classroom that isn't actually alive, hence the name Another, as they receive another student. The existence of this member, for whatever reason, will lead a bunch of people to die until eventually everyone but that dead student is dead. The way they try to stop this is by pretending one person doesn't exist per semester to try and fix the ratio of students, since now the dead person can exist peacefully. However, this year that didn't work since Koichi acknowledges Mei's existence. Or, so they think anyways. After this, people begin to die in literally the most stupid, extravagant ways you can possibly imagine. In fact, some of them are so stupid, they'll end up making you laugh. Once we hit the 3rd death of the season, I could not find myself taking this show seriously anymore, which is disastrous because Another takes its plot very seriously. Episodes consist of somber vibes, careful detective character work, drama and fights between peers about how to stop the calamity, and then any kind of suspense you may feel is thrown right out the window as a character dies because they randomly, out of the blue, got struck by lightning. This culminates in the finale, where a battle royale akin to Fortnite breaks out, and the character deaths become even stupider than they previously were all season long. While the comedic deaths certainly don't help Another's story, the mystery itself is also very poorly written. As I mentioned, it paces itself very well and intricately for 3 episodes, but after that, the mystery slows itself down to make sure that it can drag out for 7 more episodes where practically nothing outside of people dying happens in said episodes. The plot ends up quite literally boiling down to Among Us, as everyone is trying to figure out who the imposter in the classroom is. There will be things akin to emergency meetings that also end up amounting to nothing, just a quick screaming match. And in classic horror fashion, all of the characters decide that they should never tell anyone else what they're thinking or what's going on, so that everyone is lost and confused about everything. One of these communication issues that arises in the plot is that Mei has the ability to see dead people because of her hidden eye under her eye patch, so she knows who the imposter was from the very beginning of the series, but just decided to not say anything about it. If she did, the anime would have literally been solved in episode 1. Although it doesn't matter because the careful mystery it weaves out is solvable anyways to any person that's paying attention by the 6th episode, which makes the next 4 or 5 episodes feel even more like a drag to the audience. This same deep, methodical series randomly has a beach episode in it too, serving no purpose to the plot whatsoever outside of the very last few minutes. A beach episode does not help the tone of the story though, because it makes viewers relate it to your typical slice of life series, not a mystery series where every character is constantly at risk of death. Speaking of the characters, outside of Mei, who is very interesting, and Teshigawara, who is an absolute chad, everyone else in the cast is boring as shit. This cast is huge, but we hardly know anything about the majority of them. It's kind of like the opposite problem of Shiki, where we don't give a shit about their giant cast at all. And that's because most of these people are just meant to be fodder for really extravagant death scenes. Koichi will be like, "Oh no, little Billy died," and I'll be like, who the fuck is little Billy? Koichi's character boils down to protecting Mei from scrutiny by others and trying his best to figure out what's going on, but no one ever takes him seriously, so him doing that doesn't matter. Akazawa is a character who is super interesting, but never gets the time that she needs to go anywhere from lack of screen time. Kazumi is a character who also seems really interesting, but disappears from the show for like 10 episodes, and then they finally remember he exists in the finale. After episode 3, you kind of learn not to get attached to anyone because people just start dropping like flies. In fact, the majority of the time, if a character was getting remotely any type of focus in an episode, you could guess that they were going to die later in that episode. Another would have worked perfectly if it had tried to present itself as a horror comedy, or maybe if it had dialed down how stupidly most of the cast gets killed, but instead it tries to be a mystery suspense series, which it fails at pretty badly. Hence, this was going to be controversial. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10 for story. As for the horror, even if some of the death scenes were laughable, some of them were really good. You will walk out of this series looking at umbrellas, elevators, and many other things differently. Unfortunately, the really good death scenes are drowned out by the fact that most of the deaths were just so fucking stupid. The good ones really stick with you though, so I'll give the spooky at least a 6 out of 10. It's one of the only redeemable parts about this show. High School of the Dead, also known as the walking fan service, talk about an iconic anime. I remember back in middle school that some of the most popular shows were Seraph of the End, Dead Man Wonderland, Seven Deadly Sins, and this series. Hard to believe something that's 14 years old is still talked about fondly as if it came out yesterday. Takashi Komaru upsets himself by remembering the peaky promise he made with his friend Rei Miyamoto to be married one day, and seeing how she's now with his best friend Higashi Igo. His flashback to the past quickly ends when he watches a man bite his PE teacher in the neck, holy shit, which in turn sends the PE teacher into a rampage. A zombie apocalypse has quickly broken out, and it unfortunately forces him to kill his friend Hisashi. Although she's upset with him, Rei and Komaru journey through the school to find other survivors with 2 goals: find their parents and survive.
Have a nice cold pint and wait for all this to blow over.
The big question, if you ask me, after all of these years, does the show hold up? Well, yes and no. The story itself is kind of shallow. High School of the Dead came out in the later stages of the 2000 zombies craze. After big hits like 28 Days Later, Resident Evil and Wreck had already put big marks on the scene. Due to this, you would think it would have something new to add to the table, but instead it's just your typical zombie story. People get bit, which eventually leads them to die, then those people that turn into zombies continue to spread the carnage. We never really get the chance to flesh out the zombies or why this has happened to the world, and that's not really anyone's fault. The mangaka for the series, Daisuke Sato, died in 2017 after fighting ischemic heart disease for nearly 6 years. May he rest in peace. out of respect for his vision, no one has worked on the manga since his hiatus and later his passing, and thus there has never been any more anime for the series either. It's a really unfortunate series of events because there's absolutely a lot more room for story, but we'll never know where it goes or how it ends. The characters themselves are pretty one-note.
Who is she? Sarah fucking Palin?
Komaru, our main character, is edgy but he's dependable, so this leads to him getting all the girls in the series, no joke. High School of the Dead very much teeters becoming a harem. Psycho, the president of the Kendo Club, is mature and secretly a sadist. Takagi, a tsundere genius, is, well, a tsundere genius. That's kind of it. Rei is the girl Komura is wishy-washy with, but doesn't really have much of a personality outside of occasional jealousy towards the other girls. Hirano, an otaku who turns out to have a special interest in firearms, is probably the best character, honestly. We watch him go from a wimp to a hero, and then later on becomes an older brother figure for a girl who they save after her father dies. And lastly, Shizuka, a character whose little description is their hot school nurse. Doesn't serve much purpose outside of fan service. Outside of these descriptions I just gave you, these characters do not change much at all. Speaking of fan service, wow, does this series kind of have a horny problem. At first, I felt it was fitting, strangely enough. The actual horror genre for Hollywood tends to be filled with things like this, so it felt like it was taking a page from its live-action predecessors. Sometimes it was funny too, like the boob sniper rifle scene is infamous for a reason. However, it quickly became rather unbearable. The show struggles to go more than a few minutes without showing someone naked, their boobs bouncing, a shot of cleavage, someone's underwear or their ass, and that does not do the show any favors. It's hard to take it seriously when it's flaunting underage body parts at your face at pretty much all times. So the story is incomplete and shallow, the characters aren't amazing, and the fan service is annoying. Why do people still talk about this show? Well, they do because the action in the series is nothing short of amazing. High School of the Dead was animated by Madhouse during their prime, coming out around releases for them such as the Tatami Galaxy, Red Line, and the 2011 release of MrHunteru. And just like those titles, they didn't come to play around with High School of the Dead, putting their A-game into the majority of the action sequences in the show. Every zombie battle is interesting, high tense, and just a blast to watch. The animation titan was also aided by the direction of Tetsuro Araki, who directed Death Note, the first 3 seasons of Attack on Titan, Guilty Crown, and Kabanari of the Iron Fortress. It's no wonder the show did well with him reigning the helms, as those are some of the biggest titles of the 2000s and early 2010s. Some sequences in the show felt as if they were testing grounds for animation that was later seen in Attack on Titan too. So even though the story wasn't too complex, with Araki's direction and the animation from Madhouse, they were able to keep things riveting. And if you thought the production couldn't get any more stacked, there are so many A-list voice actors here just giving some of their best performances. Let me list a few for you. Komaru, our main character, is voiced by Junichi Suwabe, who has voiced Sukuna from Jujutsu Kaisen, Archer from Fate Stay Night, and Aizawa from My Hero Academia. Seiko, the Kendo president, is voiced by Miyuki Sabashiro, who has voiced Kurapika from Hunter x Hunter, Kanbaru from the Monogatari franchise, and Himiko from Kokoro Connect. Rei, the girl who doesn't have many defining traits, is voiced by Marina Inoue, who has voiced Armin from Attack on Titan, Yoko from Gurren Lagann, and Momo from My Hero Academia. These are just 3 of the characters from the show, and even random background characters have A-list voice actors behind them too, like the guy who voices Bakugo is randomly just some guy in the background. The production from this series was seriously no joke. The animation, the direction, and the voice acting take what would otherwise probably been a very forgettable story to huge heights. This is definitely what people remember the series for, and probably also for the fan service too, unfortunately. High School of the Dead is a very thrilling, fun time that is unfortunately brought down by certain elements that are rather hard to ignore. Because of this, I'll be giving this story a 6 out of 10. As for the horror, well, it's not very scary at all. I'm sure for its time it was frightening, but zombies nowadays have been so overplayed that I need more substance along them to really feel any type of emotion. Take for example the manga I Am a Hero. It makes zombies terrifying. I feel more scared loading up a lobby with the boys on World at War playing Notchster Untoten than watching this show. High School of the Dead zombies were a joke. I know the characters were afraid of them at first, but after a little bit, it just felt like, going through rounds of zombies. Which, I mean, yeah, that's fine and all, but if our characters aren't even afraid of the zombies, how are we as an audience supposed to be? Because of this, I will unfortunately be giving the Spooky a 2 out of 10. They're definitely not the best, but they aren't as bad as World War Z zombies. Fuck World War Z.
Then I watched Corpse Party Tortured Souls, the infamous anime for the iconic series of games. I watched PewDiePie play this game 10 years ago. God, that's crazy to admit. And really the only thing I remember is the line where a character says she's going to butter up her pooper.
I'm gonna go butter up my pooper?
We're obviously setting ourselves up for a masterpiece here. This show in specific is an adaptation of the 2010 PSP remake and takes place as a sequel to the Missing Footage OVA. Naturally, I watched the OVA first in that case, and it didn't really leave any strong impressions on me outside of some weird fan service moments, so the show wasn't feeling like it would be too much better.
Satoshi. どこにしがみついてんのよ?
I was right. A group of students gather with their teacher to hold a small ritual with paper charms. The reason being is one of their friends, Meiyu Suzumoto, is moving away. And since this is their last day of school, this ritual will hold them together as friends over the years. Or, so says the internet. They quickly find out these charms are connected to the elementary school that their high school was built on, one where horrible murders and kidnappings took place. Once they start their ritual, they get trapped in an alternate dimension where vengeful ghosts want to torture and kill them, and they have to work together to figure out what's going on if they ever want to make it home again. Now, as I said, I'm not the most knowledgeable about the source material, but I've been told it takes like 20 hours minimum to complete the game in its entirety. If that's true to any degree, I have no clue what they were thinking trying to adapt all of that content into 4 episodes. Needless to say, the pacing in this series is fucking absurd, and it doesn't help that the opening for the series spoils a lot of what would transpire in it. It kind of just explains what's happening at the bare minimum, then flies into the story with revelations every once in a while that have zero build up to them. We often get hit with exposition dumps that try and feed us info for the mysteries to make any sense whatsoever. Also, characters start dropping really fast in this series, so we've got no time to really get attached to anyone. Some of these deaths are brutal. I mean, the show is very well known for it, and I'm sure these deaths would really upset me if I knew more about the characters than I do. There's an argument between 2 characters that comes off as really tense, but it has subtext to it that is meaningless because it's just not built upon. I don't know these people. I don't know much about them. I couldn't actually really name many of the characters. The animation and production value for being only 4 episodes is really stellar. That cannot be understated. The deaths are all super gross and graphic, and the voice actors are absolutely giving their A games. It just doesn't matter in the end. If I haven't made it clear enough, while the show definitely has the potential to be a great character drama and a solid mystery series, it just doesn't have the time it really needed to do anything with its characters and story, which is super unfortunate because the game itself is really renowned for being good. On the other hand, I do have some gripes with the series, which is the random panty shots of the cast. Is that really necessary in something that is as high stakes, extremely tense, and insanely graphic as this show? We'll have like a toddler get murdered and then show a 15-year-old's underwear. Like, what the fuck? The series is of course rushed, but the last episode is especially rushed. We go from 3 episodes of what the fuck is going on to 1 episode of the cast all being like, we know exactly what's going on. Let's solve this shit. Like, it's fucking Scooby-Doo. Not to mention the way that it puts the bow on the story after everything that's happened, and the way that it just resolves, I think, is kind of bullshit. Shockingly though, that's where this review is going to end. I just really don't have anything else to talk about because the show didn't give me enough to work with. I'm sure there's a universe where Corpse Party got the adaptation it deserved, but that universe definitely is not the one we live in. I will be giving the story a 3 out of 10. The Spooky, on the other hand, I gotta be real, even if it was only 4 episodes, damn, were some of these the most disturbing deaths I've ever seen in an anime. It was really hard to watch what happened to some of these characters, and one of the deaths in particular, even if I didn't care much for the rest of the cast, did make me upset. Although these deaths all could have made me upset or been really impactful if the characters were all developed, and the occasional fan service, as I mentioned, really did just kill some of the tensions. Another little minor gripe of mine, we're in the damn spirit world. Why are these ghosts almost exclusively killing people with knives or weapons? Use like fucking psychic blasts or something. They do it 1 time and it's cool as fuck, and then they never do it again. So the Spooky will be getting a 6 out of 10. It's really not that bad, but it just could be a lot better. Although, do not watch if you're easily queasy. And for another iconic anime I decided to add to this list, I watched Elfen Lied. Being held in captivity away from the rest of humanity is Lucy, a special breed of human referred to as Diclonius, born with a short pair of horns and invisible telekinetic hands referred to as vectors. On one fateful day, Lucy is presented with the perfect opportunity to escape, popping heads left and right, but also getting shot in the head. This hit to her cranium splits her into two personalities, one that is harmless, almost like a child with limited speech, and the other is a possible world-ending threat. Kota and his cousin Yuka find her in a harmless state on a beach, which they quickly refer to her as New because that's all she says. They decide to take her back to their place, not knowing that she's an injured fugitive with psychopathic, murderous tendencies. Because of their action, they are quickly wrapped into a world of government conspiracy and a battle to save humanity. Elfen Lied is a story known for its gore and graphic contents, and it's not surprising why, since the show wastes no time at all with heads exploding in literally the first few seconds of the first episode. It's undoubtedly going to be too much for some viewers at times, and to add to its rampant gore are a myriad of other topics that could make the already present queasiness harder to digest. These topics are the following. Animal abuse. We see animals put into rough situations, and in one instance, unfortunately see a dog slaughtered by some asshole kids. Torture, as this race of Diclonius is experimented on by humans to try and further their understanding for them. Child abuse. Nearly all of the Diclonius are children, and we watch them get hurt time and time again. If that wasn't enough, one of the main characters, Mayu, has a backstory that could be too much for viewers. SA. There are two instances of it. One is off-screen, and the other is very on-screen, and will absolutely be triggering to those that have experienced something similar. Nudity. You're gonna see a lot of naked people, specifically teenage girls or children in this series. People will tell you it's full of uncensored breasts, and I cannot believe how much of an understatement that was. I got really sick of just how much they were on screen. Incest, as the two main characters are cousins. But Yuka is madly in love with Kota, and he reciprocates in multiple instances, and there are probably many, many more. Elfen Lied at times feels as if it's in a competition to try and have as many visually or narratively upsetting elements in it as possible, since some of these things are literally just thrown in to make it more upsetting. What's worse is while it is very bleak, it tries to add comic relief that is extremely early 2000s. By that I mean it's either fan service or arguably fetish content. For example, New, the alternate personality of Lucy, is childlike, right? After killing a bunch of people, we get to see her pee herself and the floor, watch as Kota has to clean it up and change her clothes. And even though she's childlike mentally, we watch as she grabs Kota's hands, making him rub her boob. It's weird. The fan service moments are like, hey, let's do that thing a lot of anime do where girls feel each other's boobs. Isn't that funny? Or, this girl just fell over. I guess we'll now do a little bit where the guy sees it, her underwear, and he comments on it because that's so funny, right? It's not. It's not funny. The environment is nearly always dark or depressing, and I get these elements were likely introduced to help make the rest of the grimness more digestible, but it just doesn't work because the comic relief is weird. The characters are so-so. Kota, the main character, is good, actually. He's a dependable, upstanding guy that will do everything for anyone who needs help because of something traumatic that happened to him when he was younger. He was a main character I always found I could root for. But even for how likable he is, does brother really need to kiss his fucking cousin twice, bro? Speaking of, Yuka is kind of unbearable. She is in love with her cousin so much to the point that she wants him to feel her breasts, wants to sit on his lap, and initiates the first kiss with him. All she ever really does in the plot is get jealous at the women around Kota. It's also just really weird because, bro, you are his cousin. Lucy is actually an extremely interesting character who is incredibly brought down by that new personality of hers. Yes, you know, it's an interesting gimmick to have this murderous psycho also be able to act like a lost puppy at the drop of a dime, but after the 20th time she says new, I just could not take it anymore. And Mayu, God, bro, I wish her the best. If you watch this show, she goes through way too much. Anyone who isn't named Kurama outside of the main cast isn't really likable. Like, there's this dude named Brando who is a piece of shit and just slaps women as hard as he can for no reason. Elfen Lied, I feel, is at its strongest when we actually get to see characters' relationships develop, whether romantical or familial, outside of the cousins. Nana, a Diclonius, forms a great relationship with Mayu, and I loved watching them to understand each other and the situations they were placed in. Lucy and Kota had such an interesting, intimate, and traumatic story that I wish we got to explore more, but instead, the show feels it needs to give us some more new screen time, and that the romance between blood relatives was much more important. Kurama, again, was super interesting. The way he tries to understand and be a father to a Diclonius is great. Outside of these, almost everything else in the show really struggled with its execution. It also has the most unsatisfying ending ever. Elfen Lied is how I'm sure many people felt about Long Legs, where we get build up, understanding the race of people, finding out Lucy's backstory, then someone's at their door, the clock they've been trying to get to work all season has started, and that's it, it's over, that's the end of the fucking show. Are we allergic to closure? At least Long Legs has decent explanations for its ending and a huge ARG to go along with it. Elfen Lied ends with nothing else to follow up. Needless to say, I was a little mad. Elfen Lied is a show that the majority of the time feels like it believes the story to be much more clever and artistic than it is, and there are times that it can be, but majority of the time it's rather messy, edgy, and weird. I'll give the story a 4 out of 10. I'm very shocked people love this show as much as they do. As for the spooky, I can understand that maybe in the early 2000s the gore in it was insane, but nowadays this is nothing new. Any anime I talked about in this video alone that has gore as one of the content warnings is far better at making itself disturbing, like Corpse Party. The only thing that ever disturbed me was Mayu's backstory. Bless her soul, she deserves so much better. And seeing Lucy kill innocent families. Outside of that, the series felt like it was trying way too hard to be edgy, especially with its treatment towards women. I'll be giving it a 3 out of 10 for spooky. A little pathetic.
Everyone talks about going into school live as blind as possible, since allegedly it's the best way to experience it, and so because of this will be your warning to go and watch this show. Pause the video, come back here, or come back to this section of the video at a future time and keep watching. With that out of the way though, I am going to talk about what happens in this series. Again, you have been warned. This show opens with our main character, Yuki Takuya, waking up to have yet another great day at school, greeting her friends at the school living club. This club has 4 members: Yuri Wakasa, fuck man, I cannot say these names, Kurumi Ebizuzawa, and Miki Naoki. Fuck. Naoki? Okay, I'm just gonna preface, I'm saying all of these names wrong. I definitely am. You guys in the comments, feel free to make fun of me. Along with their dog Toramaru and their supervising teacher Megumi Sakura. Their goal is to make the most out of every day at school and help around campus, with the only rule to the club being that they have to live on campus. Hence the reason it's called the School Living Club. After having chased their dog around campus, Yuki realizes she left her bag in the class she was at earlier, so she runs back to go get it. She gets caught talking to some of her classmates, so Miki comes to fetch her. After calling out to Yuki, we see for the first time from another perspective, Yuki isn't talking to anyone. In fact, she's hallucinating her classmates, and her classroom's in shambles. The outside world seems to be in shambles as well. As it turns out, they're living in a zombie apocalypse. Yuki cannot see that though, for whatever reason. So she blindly imagines life never changed as her friends try to keep everyone in their group alive.
The reveal for this moment gave me serious goosebumps.
Conceptually, moe and horror, especially zombies, doesn't sound like it would work together, but trust me, School Live makes it work. What I've noticed so far in zombie flicks is that it's very easy for their stories to get cold and heartless. The incentive always ends up being to survive and kill zombies in the process, but School Live doesn't succumb to those typical beats. Yes, we do need to survive and kill zombies, but because of its moe genre mix-in, the series opts to wear its heart right on its sleeve and somehow keep this zombie story warm. This unexpected heart in the series is largely thanks to Yuki, who because of her delusions is always able to keep a bright smile on her face. This helps the people around her feel optimistic and try to make the most out of their lives living at the school while the world around them is unfortunately rotting. Miki is a character who really needed that optimism in her life as she lost her best friend, maybe more than that, and it haunts her mental all the time. After being trapped in a mall for who knows how long, really, finding the School Living Club managed to make her smile for the first time in a long time. Along with this heart comes the question through Kurumi of whether killing zombies is okay or not. They still look like people, They sound vaguely like people, and they seem to still contain their memories as they go about their daily routines as they normally would have if they were alive. Kurumi tries her best to act tough and like a meathead who doesn't think about the morality of her actions, but she's always plagued by it, and I think it's a great conundrum to have. Are these dead people really dead? The only girl that really lacked much characterization was Yuri, but even still, it was sweet to watch her enact a motherly figure towards everyone, making sure that the gang was all taken care of and happy. In an unlikely place, during an unlikely time, these 4 girls are able to form their own family, and it's a very heartwarming thing to see happen. Sometimes I really felt myself desiring to see these characters make it all out of this unharmed, and I also was very worried for their safety because it never felt like they were immune to danger. Thanks to the care put into the characters, you really sympathize and feel when they're going through it. The outbreak itself also was done very, very well. In High School of the Dead, the outbreak just kind of happens, but in School Live we get to see it slowly ramp up over the course of an episode and from multiple perspectives until eventually society is just overrun. There are many survivors in High School of the Dead compared to School Live, where in this show we don't actually know if there are any survivors outside of the school for sure. We also get hints of the cause being a bioweapon, which granted, that isn't all that interesting, because it seems a lot of zombie stories opt to make the cause of weapon from a country that somehow got out by accident. However, because of the lighthearted and moe moments, when shit hits the fan, it really hits the fan. Certain parts of the show are extremely tense. I only have 2 complaints really. The first being fan service. This series really didn't need it. I know what you may say, it's Japan. Of course there's fan service. Most of the shows in this list have them.
I should have expected it to some degree, to be honest, but for the most part, it's clear that the goal isn't to sexualize the characters. There are moments where the characters are in their undergarments, but the show is never weird about it or draws heavy attention to these moments. However, there are sequences that feel like they cross the line into the typical fan service category. The entire 9th episode is full of sexual angles and has a decent amount of boob jiggle physics. The second complaint is that the story is unfortunately not finished, as the anime ends around chapter 31 of the manga. This may not seem like a huge deal, but the manga goes on to chapter 78 and gets a small epilogue that's 8 chapters as well. So we're missing out on over half of the story. This isn't really something that the studio can control, and that's a bummer because we may never get to see the anime reach its conclusion since it came out 7 years ago. I'm also aware that the anime cuts out some scenes from the manga that are really good and instead ignores them to focus more on the moe elements, which isn't the biggest deal, but I do feel that it hinders the story overall.
This is as far as I'll go in discussion about the series because even still, in case you're watching this and haven't seen School Live, I do want you to experience it for yourself. The story will be getting a light 8 out of 10 from me. With all the heart in this series, is it able to terrify? Kind of. Masayomi Ando, the director of this series, opts to kind of pull a Blair Witch project where we never really get to explicitly see the zombies in full. We get glimpses of them and what they look like, and sometimes it is pretty terrifying. A lot of the time though, they are clearly CGI skeletons moving in the background. Because of how much the story focuses on the characters too, the horror of the series typically takes the back seat and instead it opts more for existential dread. And that's good, the audience really feels that dread. These characters try their best to be happy, but they really can never truly be happy and live normal lives again, can they? And like I mentioned earlier, we never for sure feel that these characters are completely safe. But it does suck to see that the story kind of sidelines its zombies because a lot of episodes do lack tension. I'll give The Spooky a 5 out of 10. It's not bad, but it could have been better.
Then I watched another classic anime, Hellsing Ultimate, which despite being a classic, I feel is rarely talked about these days. Whenever a vampire attack happens in the United Kingdom, you can be assured that the Hellsing organization will be there to quickly put a stop to it. This organization is led by Integra Fairbook Wingates Hellsing, quite the name, who holds command over the most infamous vampire in the entire world, Alucard. During an attack, they pick up a new vampire to join Hellsing named Ceres Victoria, but after recruiting her, a myriad of conspiracies start to arise, leading to clashes with the Vatican and Pope, and a hidden legion of, get this, Nazi vampires. Hellsing Ultimate is a hell of a series. There is another season of the show, but it apparently strays away a decent amount from the manga, so Ultimate is the Brotherhood equivalent for this series. Not only is the story faithful to the source material, the animation is more refined, and each episode has been laid out into 40 to 60 minute episodes. This show is ridiculously fun, with there being vampire battles every episode of all kinds, fighting genetically modified priests, zombies, and genetically modified vampires. The way they depict the Vatican is also super silly too. Like, these guys will be crazy strong and then randomly start yelling, "Amen!" And I'm sure it stood out to many, but yes, there are in fact random Nazis in this series. Not the Neo kind you'd see today. No, a surviving faction of the original Third Reich that has all turned into vampires to strike the world again. I mentioned it earlier when I talked about Shiki, but vampires are seriously weaponized for war. Like, the whole series. Sometimes they feel like superheroes. Those aren't the only silly and entertaining elements of the series. The cast is also really stacked. Hellsing is probably the most badass lineup of female characters I have ever seen, period. Sarah starts off a little goofy, but turns into the most reliable sniper and gun wielder. She was originally a police officer when we met her, but through getting a second chance as a vampire, she rises to all kinds of new heights. Although her days of being an officer lead her to quite the moral quandary with her new vampiric hunger. Integra might just be one of the coolest female characters in fiction, and I do not say that lightly. She isn't a vampire, she's a normal human, but to become the leader of Hellsing's organization, she killed her uncle as a teenager and is able to command troops, Alucard, and entire sections of Britain with complete ease. When she gets involved in combat too, she isn't as insanely skilled or overpowered as the rest of the cast, but she is certainly not a threat to scoff at. Even one-off characters like Rip Van Winkle, who I wish got more screen time because I think she's really cool, and Zoran Blitz are just so damn cool. And then, of course, Alucard, who in any other series would probably be the main antagonist, is super fun to watch go crazy and ballistic. He's like if Saitama from One Punch Man was a psychopath killing machine. And then another character I'd like to talk about is the Major, the leader of the Nazi side of things. He's comically evil, and I find that rather refreshing in all honesty. I feel in recent years most villains are made to be sympathetic or understandable to some degree, so it was nice to see a character similar to Jack Horner from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, who literally just wants to cause war because he thinks war is cool. The story might sound silly, and it kind of is, but trust me, you'll never be bored watching Hellsing. However, there are of course some big downsides to the series. For example, Hellsing will not waste any time holding your hand to gradually bring you into the plot. You are basically thrown headfirst with very, very quick pacing the first few episodes. It makes sense, because they wanted to speed through what might had already been covered to get to manga content that they hadn't adapted yet, I imagine. But that makes the beginning feel so crazy with the pacing. It also had an absurd amount of gore and carnage. Like, very absurd. Body parts and people are getting ripped apart to pieces, often nearly in every episode of the series. Also, there are some sensitive moments with girls that I listed in the content warnings that could make the show very hard to watch for some. I get it's meant to show that these people are really fucked up and evil, but still, it caught me off guard when I watched it, and I can't imagine for people that are more sensitive to this what seeing these things on screen could be for them. Outside of these moments, it's really hard to understate how fun this series is. The story isn't revolutionary by any means. Like, do not expect to go into the series and come out with your life being changed. I also think the story would have been stronger if we got to see Ceres develop more or get to flesh out more of Alucard's past, but really I'm just super satisfied with what I got. I know I may not have said a ton about the series, but Hellsing really is a what you see is what you get kind of deal. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. As for the spooky, yeah, it's not scary at all. It just isn't. Most of the show is so absurd and silly that you hardly feel any dread or moments of terror, so I'll give it a 4 out of 10 for spooky. And then I watched Dusk, Maiden of Amnesia. What a metal title, right? Teiichi Niya attends the Sekyo Private Academy, a school that has harbored many secrets and occult myths. During a chance encounter, he meets the most well-known myth of the school, Yuko, a young woman who died mysteriously in the old school's basement. After her death, she developed amnesia about what the cause of her death was, and to find out what happened to her, she headed the development of a club called the Paranormal Investigators. This club later welcomes Okanogi and Kirei Kanu. I'm so bad with names, guys. I really am. As they dive into many forgotten, dark memories of the Academy. Dusk, Maiden of Amnesia, I actually almost didn't finish. The first few episodes are told narratively out of order, which can be a bit confusing at times, and then for a good 4 or 5 episodes afterwards, the story really dilly-dallies in fairly meaningless slice-of-life moments. Every episode, we get hints towards figuring out the big mystery going on in the background, but we really have to trudge through a lot to get there. If there's a typical slice of life trope, you can expect to see it here. Like a pool day, a camp, a summer camp retreat, a school festival. You've seen this song and dance before. Not to mention that on top of the extremely slow plot progression, there's a really melodramatic love rectangle. Yes, a rectangle. I did mean a rectangle. Where Yuko, who is the ghost, and the other two real students are all fighting for the affection and attention of Teichi. I will say, though, that this is the rare case for a romance series where pretty much every one of the main characters' choices are extremely likable. Although Teichi himself is very bland and boring. There's also an absurd amount of fan service in this show. I was really surprised. I think Yuko gets undressed at least once every episode, and there's a heavy attention on boobs, especially Yuko's boobs. It definitely is annoying a good amount of time because the lucky pervert trope is very prevalent in this show. For those that don't know what this is, it's where the main character will accidentally be put in a scenario where he ends up feeling a girl's body somehow. Typically her chest, and in Dusk Maiden it happens pretty much exclusively, again, on her boobs, and it happens a lot. Although, weirdly enough, I think the fan service is kind of fitting for this entry compared to the other ones in this video. Teichi and Yuko are clearly romantically and sexually interested in each other, even if she, is a ghost. A lot of the time, I really did feel like they were just gonna end up fucking at some point, but again, sometimes the fan service was just stupid, distracting, or annoying. However, around episode 8, with only 4 episodes left, this show really picks up. The fan service and slice of life elements take a step to the back burner, and the small little drops of mystery that have been building in the background start to come together as we find out what happened to Yuko. The reward for actually paying attention during all of those slice of life escapades was extremely satisfying, and watching everything form for the conclusion was really fantastic. I was casually watching the show for a while and then binged the series when I got to this point, with the ending and resolution to the series being spectacular. I can't believe I'm going to admit this, but Dusk Maiden of Amnesia gave me a minor existential crisis, making me think about my own mortality and the mortality of the people around me, like my girlfriend and my family. After finishing the show, I was shocked it could make me feel such emotions when literally a few episodes before, one of the girls was getting jealous of Yuko's boobs and wanted to drink milk to get her bigger tits. How did we go from bouncing boobies to psychological thematics like Jungian symbolism for self-actualization? Also, the animation is superb. Another title that came out over 10 years ago and somehow manages to rival shows that come out today. How on earth do these niche horror anime keep looking this good? I'm very happy that I managed to stick through the dilly-dallying because, in the end, I would say it was really satisfying mystery, and it made me sympathize for the characters. It certainly gave me a lot more to chew on than I would have expected, but damn, do you really need to make your way through a lot to get there. I've heard that the manga lays the story out in a more cohesive manner and skips a lot of the meandering, but I'm happy enough with what I saw in the anime. I just wish that this fulfillment and good storytelling was introduced a little bit earlier on. I really can't understate how good the resolution is though, so I'll be giving it a 7 out of 10. As for the spooky, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. The show did at times manage to make me uncomfortable the longer it went on, but it definitely is nothing that will give you nightmares unless you have a chronic fear of ass and titties. And then I watched what has gradually become one of the most infamous anime of all time over recent years. Serial Experiments Lain. Lain Iwakura is an introverted 14-year-old, likely on the spectrum in some capacity, and is one of many girls to receive an email from a dead classmate named Chise after her passing. Out of morbid curiosity, she decides to open her computer, where she finds the email which says that Chisa is still alive, just not in the physical world. While Lain doesn't understand, Chisa says that she will soon, and that God is with her. After this email, Lain becomes more and more wrapped up in the world of the Wired, tied to her computer, where human consciousness, a person's identity, and the very fabrics of reality are brought into question and given new meaning. I feel like ever since quarantine that I hear Serial Experiments Lain brought up more and more frequently, and after finally watching it, I can understand why. Similar to other pieces like Technolize, Evangelion, and most Satoshi Kon works like Perfect Blue, the messages in Lain seem to become more and more important every passing year. You see, Lain was released in the year 1998, which is when the internet was still very much in its infancy. Even so, the team at Triangle Staff managed to depict the internet in a shockingly accurate way that feels reminiscent of Ray Bradbury with his technological predictions in his books like Fahrenheit 451. As of July 2024, 5.45 billion people use the internet every single day, which is nearly 70% of the entire population on Earth. People shop and buy groceries online, converse and meet people, even date online, discover information or news about the world. You, right now, are using the internet just to watch this very video, and that's what makes the story of Lain, where the wired and the real world blur, all that more relevant. Where do we draw the line between reality and the internet now? Or has that line since passed? Is reality more real, or is the internet our reality now? Is the information we consume real? Can it be trusted? Who are we really? What forms our identity? Do we project ourselves online, or do our online identities become who we are as people? The internet, while vast and wondrous, is quite dangerous, and in recent years has become a discussion on whether it's damaging us more than it's helping. And these are all topics somehow Lain discusses, a show that came out nearly 30 years ago. Lain tries to maintain her identity and perception of self, but it becomes incredibly hard when she grows more and more invested in the internet, and especially after learning that there appears to be another version of her in the wired. As she tries to navigate the world and learn more about herself, she learns that people create personas of how they want people to perceive them, how manipulated and tampered information and data can become, as well as how rumors can spread worldwide in a matter of seconds. While the internet provides a limitless connectivity for everyone, that connectivity is superficial or surface level at best. I feel like themes and questions it asks only again have become more relevant with the intense relevance of social media, the introduction of generative AI in recent years. And I'm sure you all have heard about the dead internet theory, as well as some more recent ideas like Google Lens, which will bring the power of the internet right to your eyeballs. I'm sure that the themes in Lain will only become more relevant as technology continues to progress, but the ideas it discusses and the warning it provides will likely go unnoticed by the larger public. Speaking of noticing, I'm sure you've probably picked up that I'm talking a lot about themes rather than the plot, and that's because the plot is weird as shit. Lain is a part of the Denpa genre, or what we have simply referred to in English as the dementia genre. This genre is usually referred to Japanese works with heavy themes about social isolation, existentialism, or are extremely experimental to the point that they can make viewers feel as if they are going insane because they all tend to be psychological mindfucks. Some of these shows are Welcome to the NHK, Boogiepop Phantom, Paranoia Agent, Fooly Cooly, and the previously mentioned Evangelion and Perfect Blue. So, naturally, Lain is fucking insane. I've seen people online refer to Serial Experiments Lain as being one of the only shows where what the show is trying to say is so much easier to understand than how the show is saying it. And I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I watched the first few episodes of this anime with my friend Phoenix, and he said even though that this would be his third rewatch, he had no clue what was actually going on in the plot. I don't think I've ever had a harder time understanding the story and anything I've consumed before. Don't get me wrong, it's a great show, but God, I feel most people will have a very difficult time watching it. If you can stomach a plot that will really challenge you as a viewer, then do yourself a favor and watch Serial Experiments Lain. I think it's pretty much impossible to talk about what all the show has to offer unless it's given its own video, but seeing as people have fantastic breakdowns on this anime already, I don't think I'll be making a Lain video anytime soon. I can understand why it's a masterpiece for so many, and maybe I'll give it a rewatch, but for now it's getting a 9 out of 10 for me, because its themes were great, but lord, can I just not really understand what was going on. I could follow it, but that doesn't mean I was comprehending it. As for the spooky, this show has a lot going on. It was unsettling for sure throughout most of its runtime, but I feel like what could really unnerve people is off-put by how hard the gears were turning in my brain to try to figure out what the show was saying. So I'll be giving the spooky a 6 out of 10. Let's all love Lain. And the 13th show I watched, our spooky number, actually is probably my favorite in this list, and that was Boogiepop Phantom. When a bright light shines into the sky, many murders and strange occurrences seem to happen around town. Many seem to believe that a rumored Shinigami named Boogiepop is involved in it all. Nearly each episode, we explore a new character and how this strange event affected them, while comparisons are drawn to a serial killing spree 5 years prior. If that brief plot summary didn't make a whole lot of sense, this show might not make much sense either. Boogiepop Phantom is often cited as the spiritual successor to Serial Experiments Lain in many ways, especially since it's made by much of the same team as Lain. This anime is typically referred to as a puzzle from reviewers when it comes to understanding this plot. When going into the show, one of the only things I was told is, quote, "If you pay attention, you will be rewarded." What an understatement that is. Boogiepop requires a viewer's full attention. No texting or glancing at your phone, no turning this on in the background or having a YouTube video playing either, no watching it while you call someone. You need to pay attention. Boogiepop Phantom is told narratively out of order, similar to the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. However, unlike Haruhi, there are no watch orders that can fix this. It is purposely told out of order to feed an audience member certain information at certain points. You could be told something about the plot in episode 3 that'll loop back around in episode 9. Complemented by its strange story structure, this series is almost an anthology, with episodes being very, very loosely connected. While there are frequent occurring characters, similar to stories like Trick or Treat or Paranoia Agent, there isn't really a main character to latch onto. Instead, we are meant to attach ourselves to ideas and to the town itself, with this ever-looming feeling that something awful is going on in this city. As if the story wasn't already hard enough sounding to follow, it's not even the true beginning of Boogiepop as the anime adapts the second and third light novels, ignoring the first one. The anime invites the audience to be a detective, similar to the recent film Longlegs, and if an audience member accepts, they are in for one of the most rewarding anime experiences that the medium has to offer. But not for what you may think. During its 12-episode run, Boogiepop Phantom tackles a myriad of themes that may be hard to pick up on for your first viewing. I obviously haven't picked up on them all, but here is what I did manage to notice through my viewing. Do people lose core parts about who they are as they move from childhood to adolescence to adulthood? Do we simply consume, whether it's food, media, or ecstasy, with no second thoughts about our actions? If we are suffering, is it okay to remove the cause of our sufferings, such as memories about them, if that means that we will feel better in the end? If given the power to change the lives of others, would you do it? And would you do it for better or for worse? Do we ever change, really? Or is it the world around us that changes? Is it worth it to be selfless if the result is harming yourself or losing yourself along the way? Is the world we live in meant to be understood? Those are what I picked up on just on my first watch through of the anime. Each episode seems to contain a different thought train for the audience to chew on. In some cases, they contain multiple ideas in one episode. And the thing is, much like how it asks if the world is meant to be understood, it doesn't help us in understanding these complex questions Boogiepop asks. Instead, these answers are up to us to find out. Boogiepop merely just opens the door for discussion and exploration through its characters and its world. While the designs and art style aren't particularly anything special, to complement its heavy philosophical questions, there is clear thought put into the composition of the series. Every shot is extremely cinematic, oftentimes with stills emitting themes about the story without the audience even realizing it. The soundtrack and especially the sound effects also bring the show to crazy heights, with it probably having the best sound design I've ever heard in an anime. Another thing is that Boogiepop Phantom, or Boogiepop and Others for the light novels, might secretly be one of the most influential pieces in Japan that no one ever seems to talk about. Ryukishi 7, the creator of Higurashi and Umineko, was heavily inspired by these series, as well as Nisio Isen, who went on to write the Monogatari franchise, and Nasu with the Fate franchise and Garden of Sinners. I myself would say I'm a fan, even if I just consumed the one anime right now. There's a 2019 anime and a long series of light novels that I actually really want to dive into to further my understanding about this series. With all that being said, it's good. Genuinely. If you want a show that will really make you think, please watch Boogiepop Phantom. Not enough people are talking about this series, and I think it deserves a bigger fan base and more discussion than it is getting right now. Although since, again, I wasn't able to pick up everything on my first viewing, I'll have to settle with an 8 out of 10. With rewatches, just like Lain, I do think this anime has masterpiece potential, but that is just how I'm going to rate it based off my understanding of it right now. I already have the novels in my cart on Amazon, and I plan to watch the 2019 anime after this video is finished, so we'll see how the rest holds up in comparison. As for the spooky, this series is horrific. The entire atmosphere is bleak, dull, and eerie, and somehow it does an excellent job of completely immersing the viewer in Boogiepop's environment. It feels very reminiscent of Technolize from last year's horror video. Some scenes in this show are very hard to sit through, and I even had a nightmare about the show one night after watching it. So needless to say, it's spooky, for anime standards anyways. So I'll be giving it an 8 out of 10 for spooky. And with all of that being said, do some of these shows deserve to be on last year's video? Yes, some of them definitely did disturb me as much as the shows and films I talked about last year. Those titles specifically being Shiki and Boogiepop Phantom, and maybe with rewatches Lain as well. The other shows I don't believe fit the list, with some not even really coming close. While I still don't believe anime as a medium really can be scary, I do definitely think it can be disturbing and uncomforting, but we are on the way to getting something genuinely scary. Dark Gathering was close and hopefully has set a good path for future horror anime. Anyway, here's a tier list for the shows by score for overall, and now here's one for them for spooky. And I would like to thank my patrons, Bandy, Juliet, Joshua Davis, Ray, and Jim. Without you guys, God, these last 2 videos would have been really hard. Thank you for your support.